Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet Voice Podcast channel. Tonight we're stepping into New York during the brutal winter of 1963, when the city seems wrapped in iron, cold, and every ordinary journey becomes a small test of endurance. You stand beneath a pale morning sky, while wind pushes between tall buildings and turns every street corner into a funnel of freezing air. Snow lies along the curbs in uneven ridges, already stained by traffic, coal dust, and thousands of passing shoes. Cars crawl through slush. Steam rises from street vents. Somewhere nearby, a bus groans away from the curb while someone pulls a scarf higher across a tired face. This is not the polished New York of postcards. It is a working city in winter. Crowded, noisy, stubborn, and very cold. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you get comfortable, tell us where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. Perhaps you are hearing this late at night, safely under a warm blanket, which already makes you wealthier in comfort than many New Yorkers stepping outside this morning. Now, it's time to rest. You move into the city slowly, as though the cold itself controls the pace. January has arrived with a severity that people notice even in a place accustomed to winter. New York has known snow before. Of course, it has known frozen rivers, blocked streets, and bitter winds coming down from the north. Yet this season feels particularly relentless. Newspapers carry reports of low temperatures, travel trouble, and storms sweeping across much of the eastern United States. Records confirm that the winter of 1962 and 1963 ranks among the colder periods remembered by many communities across the region, and New York shares in that long stretch of discomfort. The first thing you notice is the wind. Temperature alone tells only part of the story. A thermometer might offer one number, but standing at an intersection beside a canyon of office buildings gives you another reality entirely. Air races between brick and stone walls, catching loose newspapers and pushing them along the pavement. A man waiting for the light to change turns his back to the gust. A woman grips her hat with one gloved hand. Everyone develops the same winter posture. Shoulders raised, chin lowered, steps quickened. The city smells different in deep cold. Exhaust hangs near traffic. Coal smoke still drifts from some buildings, mixed with the oily scent of heating fuel and the faint sweetness escaping from bakeries opening before sunrise. You pass a coffee shop and the warm smell seems almost unfair. Through the glass, cups steam on counters while outside your fingers begin to stiffen despite your gloves. In 1963, there is no small glowing screen in your pocket telling you exactly when the weather will improve. You hear forecasts on radio or television, read them in the newspaper, and then trust your own face when you open the front door. Snow changes the sound of New York as well. Fresh accumulation softens the city for a few hours. Tires hiss instead of roar. Footsteps become dull. A distant horn sounds strangely muted. Then the machinery begins. Plows push through major streets, shovels scrape sidewalks, and building workers attack entrances with the determination usually reserved for personal enemies. Oddly enough, snow does not remain beautiful for very long in a city filled with traffic, within hours. Bright white banks become grey, then brown, then nearly black at the edges. It is winter scenery with a strong urban sense of humour. You watch people adjust rather than surrender. Shop owners sweep their thresholds. Delivery drivers stamp their feet beside trucks. Policemen stand at intersections wearing heavy coats. Newspaper sellers remain near subway entrances, surrounded by stacks protected from damp air. Street vendors keep working where they can. The city cannot simply close because the weather has become unpleasant. Millions of people depend on trains, stores, offices, schools, factories, hospitals, and one another. There is a certain toughness expected of New Yorkers in this period. Although toughness is easier to admire from a warm room, complaining about the cold is perfectly acceptable, perhaps even mandatory. But the expectation is that you keep moving. You go to work, you carry groceries, you wait for the bar, you shovel the sidewalk because someone has to, you help push a car when its tyres spin uselessly against packed snow. A stranger may grumble while helping you, which in New York can sometimes count as affection. For families, winter creates practical calculations, how much heating fuel remains. Will the boiler behave? Are the children dressed warmly enough? Can the elderly neighbour manage the stairs? Does the grocery trip need to happen today, or can it wait until the wind eases? These questions sound small, yet they shape daily life. Winter is not one dramatic event. It is hundreds of minor decisions repeated from morning until night. Scholars still disagree about how much weather itself shapes the memory of a particular year, because people often remember hardship through personal experience rather than statistics. One household might recall a winter as unbearable because the furnace failed. Another might remember the same month fondly because children spent afternoons sledding in a park. Memory turns climate into biography. You cross another avenue and feel fine crystals of snow strike your cheeks. Above you, apartment windows glow yellow against the darkening afternoon. Laundry rooms hum in basements. Radiators knock behind walls. Restaurant doors open briefly and release little clouds of warmth onto the sidewalk. The city is fighting winter one heated room at a time. By evening, the sidewalks shine beneath street lamps. Melted snow has begun freezing again in patches, creating the sort of surface that encourages dignity to disappear without warning. A businessman steps carefully around one slick spot, only to discover another waiting for him. Winter offers equality in this small matter. Expensive shoes and cheap shoes can both slide beautifully. You continue through the cold while New York continues around you. Restless even under snow, trains thunder beneath the pavement. Apartment lights multiply. Dinner begins behind fogged windows. Somewhere a radio announces another cold night ahead. The city settles, but never completely sleeps. Carrying millions of private lives through one of those winters remembered less for a single spectacular moment than for the steady pressure of cold upon every ordinary day. You wake before sunrise inside a New York apartment that feels less like a sanctuary from winter and more like a negotiation with it. The room is dim, the windows are clouded with frost, and the first thing you notice is not the view outside but the temperature of the air touching your face. Beneath the blankets, you're reasonably comfortable. Beyond them lies a colder kingdom. The wooden floor waits for your feet with all the tenderness of a sheet of ice. And somewhere inside the wall a radiator makes a hollow metallic knock, as though it too is protesting the hour. Getting out of bed becomes a small act of courage. You reach for clothing before fully standing, pulling on socks, a robe, perhaps a sweater, and anything else that can delay contact with the cold. Many apartments in 1963 depend on central boilers that send steam or hot water through metal radiators, but the results are not always even. One room can be almost tropical while another feels suspiciously close to an outdoor platform. Building age, maintenance, insulation, and the mood of the heating system all seem to have opinions about your comfort. Records from the period confirm that much of New York housing includes older apartment buildings constructed decades earlier, often with single-pane windows and far less insulation than modern residents expect. Heat escapes through frames, cracks, stairwells, and walls with remarkable enthusiasm. Tenants sometimes roll towels along windowsills or push cloth against gaps to stop drafts. Curtains become more than decoration. They are part of the defensive line. You walk toward the kitchen and hear the familiar sounds of a building waking up. Pipes tick inside the walls. Water rushes somewhere above you. A door closes in the corridor. Someone downstairs turns on a radio. The building feels almost alive, a vertical neighborhood linked by plumbing. heating pipes, footsteps, and the occasional argument travelling through plaster with impressive clarity. The window is your morning weather report. Frost forms delicate patterns along the glass, beautiful in a way that is easier to appreciate when you are not responsible for paying the heating bill. You rub a small circle clear and look toward the street. Rooftops are pale, fire escapes hold thin shelves of snow, chimneys and vents release drifting clouds into the frozen air. Breakfast begins with the stove. Coffee is especially welcome, not only because it wakes you, but because holding the cup warms your fingers. Oatmeal, eggs, toast, or another hot meal can make the kitchen the most desirable room in the apartment. The smell of coffee mixes with toast and warm metal. A family may gather close to the table partly from affection and partly because nobody is eager to wander into the colder hallway. In some homes, the kitchen oven is opened midden for extra warmth after cooking. This practice is risky, especially with gas appliances, yet oddly enough it becomes familiar enough in poorly heated apartments that many residents treat it as ordinary winter improvisation. A kitchen can briefly become a gathering place simply because it is warmer than the rest of the home. Comfort sometimes depends less on elegant design than on knowing exactly which room is least unpleasant. Children present their own challenge. You have to convince them to leave warm beds, wash in cold bathrooms, eat breakfast, and prepare for school while they complain that their clothes feel freezing. Their sweaters may have been placed near a radiator during the night. Boots wait near the door, sometimes still damp from the previous day. Mittens have a mysterious habit of separating from their partners at precisely the worst possible moment. Bathrooms can be especially unfriendly. Tile floors hold the cold, metal fixtures feel icy, hot water may take time to arrive, and in some older buildings it does not arrive with the confidence you would like. You turn the tap and wait. The pipes answer with a groan. When warm water finally appears, it feels like a private victory. Apartment life also means depending on the superintendent or building owner when the heat fails. A boiler problem is not simply an inconvenience during a severe cold spell. It can become urgent. Tenants telephone, knock on doors, and compare temperatures in hallways. Someone insists their radiator has been cold all night. Someone else claims theirs is making noise but producing almost no heat, which feels particularly insulting. Arguments among historians of urban housing divide over how best to measure everyday winter hardship, because official standards tell only part of the story. A building may technically have a heat, while individual rooms remain uncomfortable. Tenant memories describe cold in personal terms, shaped by age, income, health, and the condition of each apartment. A young adult might endure a chilly bedroom with little concern. An elderly resident or an infant faces a very different situation. Crowding changes everything. In working-class households, several family members may share a small number of rooms, and winter makes privacy even more limited because everyone gravitates toward the warmest spaces. Coats hang from hooks near the entrance, wet shoes gather on newspaper, gloves rest on radiators, the smell of wool, cooking, cigarette smoke, and damp clothing becomes part of the interior season. You can hear neighbours more clearly in winter because windows stay closed and people spend longer indoors. Radios play popular music, news, sports and advertisements. Televisions flicker behind curtains. Someone practices piano badly but enthusiastically. Baby cries. A couple debates a household expense. The apartment building becomes an enormous box filled with separate lives, each family trying to make its rooms comfortable enough to get through another cold day. There are households with excellent heating, or of course, some residents wake in apartments so warm that windows are cracked open even in winter, allowing steam heat to escape into freezing streets. That strange contradiction is a familiar feature of older city heating systems. Too little heat is miserable, but too much heat can turn a bedroom into a greenhouse. Precision is not always the system's greatest talent. Morning advances, you dress fully now, fastening buttons, checking scarves, searching for keys, and making sure nobody has forgotten a lunch bag. The apartment has done what it can for you. It has offered shelter, imperfect warmth, breakfast, and a temporary barrier against the weather outside. Then your hand reaches for the cold metal doorknob. The hallway waits beyond it, carrying the faint smell of floor polish, cooking, and winter coats. You step out dressed for the day, leaving behind the rattling radiator and the fogged windows, carrying with you the particular gratitude that comes from knowing there will be a warm room somewhere when you return. You stand near the apartment door while the cold waits on the other side, and dressing suddenly becomes less about appearance than survival. In New York during the winter of 1963, clothing is your first shield against the weather. You pull on thick socks, sturdy shoes or boots, a heavy coat, gloves, and a scarf wrapped carefully around your neck. A hat matters more than pride now. The air outside is sharp enough to make fashion feel negotiable. And even the most elegant New Yorker understands that frozen ears are not a sign of sophistication. The winter wardrobe of the period is built from heavier materials than many people use today. Wool is everywhere. Wool coats, wool trousers, wool skirts, wool sweaters, wool scarves, and wool socks create layers of warmth, though not always softness. Some garments scratch the skin with quiet determination. Children may complain about stiff collars and itchy sweaters, while parents insist that comfort is a luxury compared with catching cold. Synthetic fabrics exist and are becoming more common, but traditional winter clothing still depends heavily on natural fibres, thick linings, and sheer weight. You button a long overcoat and immediately feel the difference. These coats can be substantial, especially men's dress coats made for commuting to offices where suits remain standard. Women often wear structured coats reaching below the knee, sometimes with fur collars or warm linings. Fashion magazines may suggest graceful winter elegance, but a gust racing down an avenue has little respect for careful tailoring when the temperature drops severely. A beautiful coat earns admiration only if it also keeps the wind out. Records from the period show that hats remain far more common in everyday public dress than they are in many later decades. Men wear felt hats, caps, or warmer winter styles, while women choose everything from knitted coverings to carefully shaped hats designed to match coats. On bitter mornings, practicality begins winning the argument. A knitted cap that covers the ears may not look glamorous, but the first blast of wind provides a persuasive review. You step into the hallway and tighten your scarf. Scarves are not decorative accessories on mornings like this. They protect the neck, lower face, and small openings where cold air slips beneath a coat collar. Some people wrap them twice and tuck the end securely inside. Others pull them across the mouth so that every breath warms the fabric slightly. Within minutes outside, moisture from your breathing may collect near the scarf and leave it damp. A minor irritation that becomes strangely familiar. Gloves create another problem. Thick gloves keep your hands warmer, but make ordinary tasks clumsy. Coins are harder to handle. Keys seem smaller. Newspaper pages resist cooperation. If you need exact movement, you may remove one glove briefly and immediately regret the decision. Your fingers begin aching in the cold, and the glove suddenly becomes the most important object you own. A curious footnote of winter clothing is the frequent use of newspaper as emergency insulation. Workers, deliverymen, and people spending long periods outdoors sometimes place folded newspaper inside clothing or shoes to block wind and add another thin layer between the body and the cold. It is not elegant, and no department store window is likely to recommend it, but desperation has always been an imaginative tailor. You descend the stairs and find other residents preparing for the same battle. A child struggles with rubber overshoes pulled over ordinary footwear. Another wears boots fastened with buckles that take patience to secure. Rubber coverings are useful because city snow quickly becomes wet slush, and wet shoes can ruin an entire day. Leather alone may not survive repeated encounters with salted streets, dirty puddles, and half-frozen curbside water. The moment you reach the building entrance, you understand why clothing matters so much. Cold air presses against the glass door. You push outside and the wind immediately searches for weaknesses. It sips beneath cuffs, finds the space between scarf and collar, and moves through fabric that seemed perfectly warm indoors. Your cheeks tighten, your eyes water. The first few steps are always the most dramatic because your body has not yet adjusted. Street fashion changes under these conditions. People walk with their hands in pockets and their heads lowered. Shoulders rise toward ears, coats are buttoned completely rather than worn casually open. Women wearing skirts often rely on thick stockings, long coats, and boots for protection, while men in business clothing may layer undershirts and sweaters beneath jackets. Some office workers carry dress shoes separately and commute in more practical footwear, an arrangement that preserves both warmth and polished leather. Children look especially padded, almost round beneath their layers. Snow pants, heavy coats, mittens, scarves, and hats can make movement awkward, but children compensate with energy. They run ahead, slide where they should not, and somehow lose a glove despite having been warned 5 times not to lose it. The adult response is a mixture of frustration and resignation. Winter parenting includes a surprising amount of searching for small items of clothing. Scholars continue to debate how strongly class determined winter comfort in mid-century cities, because clothing quality, housing quality, working conditions, and transportation all overlapped. A wealthy resident can afford a fine insulated coat and take a taxi when conditions become miserable. A lower income worker may own only one dependable winter coat and spend much longer waiting outdoors for public transportation. 2 people can face the same temperature while experiencing very different levels of risk and discomfort. Department stores display winter clothing as both necessity and aspiration. Manhattan windows present polished mannequins in coordinated coats, gloves, hats, and boots, while ordinary pedestrians outside mix whatever actually works. A fashionable scarf may accompany an old coat, expensive gloves may be worn with repaired boots. Clothing tells stories about income, work, age, and personal taste, but severe weather has the democratic habit of making everyone check whether their ears are covered. The sidewalks are busy now, filled with dark coats moving beneath grey skies. You hear the soft brushing sound of wool sleeves, the crunch of boots over frozen snow, and the occasional slap of rubber soles against wet pavement. People move quickly because standing still allows the cold to settle deeper into the body. At street corners, strangers shift from foot to foot while waiting for the signal to change. You feel the weight of your own clothing with every block, yet you are grateful for every layer. Your coat absorbs the wind, your gloves protect stiffening fingers, and your scarf carries the warmth of each breath. In this winter city, getting dressed is not a casual morning ritual. It is preparation for the street, a quiet armour assembled from wool, leather, rubber, patience, and the practical knowledge that New York in deep winter rewards anyone who respects the cold. You step onto a New York sidewalk already crowded with people who are trying to reach work, school, shops, and appointments without surrendering too much dignity to the weather. Snow has been pushed toward the curb, leaving narrow paths through grey slush. Every crossing becomes a small calculation. You look for a patch of pavement that seems solid, test it with 1 foot, and hope that the dark puddle beside it is shallow. Sometimes it is. Sometimes winter has prepared a private joke. The morning commute in 1963 depends heavily on public transportation. The subway carries enormous numbers of riders, but buses, elevated routes still in service, commuter trains, taxis, and private automobiles all remain part of the daily pattern. When heavy snow arrives, every part of that system feels the strain. Buses lose speed, cars skid, sidewalks narrow, and people arrive at stations carrying damp coats and expressions suggesting they have already lived through a full day. You walk toward a bus stop where a small crowd has formed. Nobody wants to stand in the wind longer than necessary, yet nobody can make the bus appear faster. People glance repeatedly down the avenue as though collective staring might summon it. A woman holds a shopping bag close to her side. 2 office workers discuss traffic. A schoolboy kicks at a ridge of frozen snow until his mother tells him to stop. The city waits together, impatiently. When the bus finally appears, it moves slowly through packed slush, tires grinding against the street. Records confirm that severe winter weather could disrupt surface transportation across New York, especially when snow accumulated faster than crews could clear side streets. Major avenues receive attention first, but neighborhood routes can remain difficult. A bus driver may have to fight both weather and traffic while passengers silently wonder whether walking would have been faster. You climb aboard and immediately meet a new winter problem. Everyone is wearing bulky clothing. A bus that feels crowded in summer seems even tighter when every passenger has a heavy coat, hat, scarf, gloves, and perhaps a package or briefcase. Wet fabric brushes against wet fabric. The windows fog from warm breath. People shuffle deeper into the aisle while the driver calls for everyone to move back. The ride is rough. The bus pulls away carefully, then slows again at the next intersection. Cars ahead struggle for traction. Trucks throw dirty water toward the curb. A taxi attempts a quick lane change and discovers that snow does not respect confidence. You can feel the vehicle slide slightly before the driver corrects it. Conversations pause for a moment, then resume with the calm of people who have decided that worrying will not improve the road. A curious footnote of winter commuting is the importance of chains and traction devices for vehicles. Drivers sometimes use tyre chains in severe conditions, producing a distinctive metallic clatter against pavement. They improve grip on snow but create noise and vibration that everyone notices. A city street filled with chained tyres can sound less like a polished metropolis and more like a workshop moving slowly through a storm. For those driving private cars, the morning may begin with a long excavation. Snow has collected on the roof, hood, windshield, and around the tyres. You scrape glass, clear the headlights, and dig a path from the curb. Then comes the hopeful turn of the ignition. Cold weather can punish weak batteries, reluctant engines, and anyone already late for work. If the car starts, gratitude arrives quickly. If it does not, the morning becomes much more complicated. Parking presents another contest. A cleared space is valuable, and once a driver spends 20 minutes digging one out, surrendering it can feel almost tragic. City residents understand the strange emotional attachment that develops between a person and a rectangle of cleared pavement. There may be no official claim to it, but the shovel marks tell a story. Winter turns parking into a form of neighbourhood diplomacy, occasionally with poor diplomatic results. You leave the bus and continue on foot toward a subway entrance. Sidewalk conditions vary from building to building because property owners and workers clear snow with different levels of enthusiasm. One stretch is clean, the next is packed hard and polished by hundreds of shoes. You shorten your steps. Falling in public is unpleasant at any age. But falling while carrying a briefcase and pretending afterward that nothing happened requires a special urban discipline. Scholars still disagree over how much severe weather actually changes long-term commuting habits in dense cities. Some argue that reliable underground transportation makes New York unusually resilient. Others emphasize how surface delays, station access, labor disruptions, and mechanical problems still make storms deeply disruptive. The truth is visible around you. The city continues moving, but continuing is not the same as moving easily. At the entrance to the subway, people descend in a steady stream. Snow melts from their shoes onto the stairs, making the steps slick. Hands grip cold railings. A man near the bottom shakes moisture from his hat, narrowly missing a stranger who gives him a look capable of lowering the temperature further. Above ground, taxis remain essential for those who can afford them or urgently need them. Hailing one in bad weather can become an exercise in frustration. Cabs are already occupied, traffic is slow, and drivers must navigate streets narrowed by snowbanks. You raise your arm as one approaches, only to watch it pass with a passenger in the back seat. Another appears, and 3 people farther down the block wave at the same time. Commuter rail passengers arriving from surrounding areas face their own challenges. Snow on tracks, frozen switches, delayed trains, and difficult road connections can stretch a normal journey. Yet office schedules still exist, factories still open, hospitals still need staff, and shops still need workers behind counters. The winter commute is shaped by this simple fact. Most people cannot decide that the weather has become inconvenient enough to cancel responsibility. As morning advances, the streets grow more churned and less beautiful. Snow becomes slush, slush becomes dirty water, and passing vehicles send it toward trouser cuffs and stockings. Shoes begin carrying salt stains, coat hems darken with moisture. The city looks tired before noon. Still, movement never stops completely. Buses grind forward, trains arrive beneath the streets, taxis search for openings, pedestrians continue between them all. You become part of the rhythm, stepping carefully, waiting patiently, adjusting constantly. Winter has slowed New York, but it has not persuaded the city to stay home. You descend beneath the street and feel the air change almost immediately. The cold is still clinging to your coat, but the deeper you move into the subway station, the less violently the winter seems to reach you. Metal steps rings beneath shoes, turnstiles click somewhere below. A train roars through a tunnel and pushes a warm gust up the staircase. For a few minutes, the underground feels like refuge, not because it is elegant, but because it is simply not freezing. The station carries its own winter atmosphere. Damp wool coats release the smell of melting snow. Leather shoes leave dark prints on concrete. Wet umbrellas drip beside briefcases and shopping bags. The air is warmer than the street but thicker, mixed with dust, metal, tobacco smoke, machinery, and the faint electrical scent that seems to belong only to underground railways. You loosen your scarf slightly and immediately feel more human. New York's subway system is already enormous in 1963, carrying millions of riders across the city and allowing daily life to continue even when surface streets become difficult. Records confirm that by this period the system links large parts of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx through a dense network of underground and elevated lines. For workers, students, shoppers, and families, it is not merely transportation, it is one of the city's great mechanical lifelines. You stand on the platform among commuters who have developed impressive skill at appearing uninterested in one another. A man reads a folded newspaper close to his face. A woman holds a handbag firmly beneath one arm. 2 teenagers whisper and laugh. An older passenger stares toward the dark tunnel, perhaps hoping concentration alone will bring the train sooner. Everyone is close together, yet each person tries to preserve a tiny private world. The platform is warmer than outside, but comfort is relative. Drafts move through tunnels without warning. A train arriving on the opposite track sends air rushing across your face. Snowmelt collects near stairways and turns floors slippery. Public address announcements can be difficult to understand through echoes and mechanical noise. So experienced riders rely on signs, habit, and instinct. If you are uncertain where to go, this is not always a city that notices your uncertainty quickly. Then you hear the train approaching. First comes a distant vibration underfoot. The rails begin to sing, headlights appear around the curve, and suddenly the platform fills with wind, screeching metal, and the heavy thunder of cars slowing toward you. The doors open, and the calm arrangement of waiting passengers changes at once. People step out, others step in. There is a brief choreography of shoulders, bags, elbows, and polite impatience. Inside, winter clothing makes everything more crowded. Thick coats widen every body, scarves trail over laps, gloves make it harder to grip coins, newspapers, or handbags. If you find a seat, you settle against a hard surface, still holding traces of another passenger's warmth. If you stand, you grip a pole and sway as the train moves away. Oddly enough, the subway can become so warm during winter that riders who are desperate for shelter from the cold soon begin unbuttoning coats. The contrast is almost comic. 10 minutes earlier, you are tightening every layer against the wind. Now you're surrounded by warm bodies in an enclosed car, wondering why you dressed like an expedition leader. The train rattles through darkness while fluorescent lights flicker overhead. Advertisements line the walls, offering everything from household products to entertainment. Newspaper headlines rise and fall as passengers turn pages. There are no glowing personal screens to absorb everyone into separate worlds. People read, stare, doze, talk quietly, or simply watch the stations pass. Social rules govern the carriage even if nobody explains them. You avoid staring too long, you make room when possible, you learn how to stand without stepping on shoes. You understand that somebody rushing toward closing doors believes, with remarkable confidence, that this particular train is the last train in human history. Conductors warn passengers to stand clear, but urgency often defeats wisdom. For workers spending the day outdoors, the subway offers a few precious minutes to thaw. A delivery man flexes cold fingers inside his gloves. A construction worker leans back and closes his eyes. A police officer rides between stations with snow still melting from the shoulders of his coat. The train gives them warmth, motion, and a temporary pause from the weather above them. Scholars continue to debate how strongly the subway shaped social mixing in mid-century New York. Some emphasize the way people from different classes, neighborhoods, occupations, and backgrounds were physically brought together every day. Others point out that residential segregation, employment patterns, and unequal access still separated lives beyond the train doors. Both truths seem visible inside the car. People share space, but they do not necessarily share circumstances. At major stations, the crowd thickens. Passengers pour from staircases and passageways. Footsteps echo in every direction. Signs point toward connecting lines. You follow the movement, careful not to hesitate in the middle of a busy corridor, unless you wish to discover how little patience a rushing commuter possesses. A curious feature of the underground world is how quickly you lose contact with the weather. There are no windows showing snow falling across rooftops. There is only tunnel darkness, station light, and the rhythm of stops. You might travel several miles while barely thinking about the storm until the train rises onto an elevated stretch or you climb toward the street again. At one station, a musician plays near a passageway, the sound carrying farther than expected through tile and concrete. Coins occasionally in an open case, the melody competes with train brakes, conversations, and announcements, yet somehow survives, even beneath a frozen city. Somebody is still performing for strangers. You reach your stop and join the stream toward the stairs. With every step upward, the temperature begins falling. The air becomes sharper. Your scarf goes back around your neck. Gloves return securely over your fingers. The street entrance glows pale above you, and beyond it lies the cold again. For one stretch of the journey, however, the subway has served as more than a machine. It's been shelter, waiting room, meeting place, furnace, stage, and moving corridor beneath the winter streets. You emerge carrying the heat of the train for a few brief moments, until the wind finds you once more. You arrive at work with cold still trapped in the seams of your coat, and the city offers no ceremony for your effort. Offices open, deliveries begin, counters rise, factory floors fill, and street crews take their positions as though the weather were merely another difficult customer. In 1963, a brutal winter does not erase the working day, it complicates it. You shake moisture from your shoes, Hang your coat where it can dry, rub your hands together, and begin whatever task pays the rent. Inside an office building, warmth can feel almost luxurious. Radiators hiss beneath windows while typewriters begin their steady clatter. Telephones ring, filing cabinets open and close. Secretaries carry folders between desks. Clerks sort papers, and managers study schedules that remain stubbornly indifferent to snow. The air smells of paper, coffee, tobacco smoke, and damp wool. You may spend the first hour trying to restore feeling to your fingers while pretending that everything is perfectly normal. Records confirm that New York in the early 1960s remains a city of immense occupational variety, from finance and publishing to manufacturing, transportation, retail, construction, public service, and countless small trades. That variety matters during severe weather because winter does not affect every worker in the same way. If your job keeps you behind a desk, the cold is an inconvenience. If your job keeps you on a loading dock, a rooftop, a sidewalk, or the back of a truck, the cold becomes a constant physical presence. You follow a delivery man lifting crates from a truck while wind pushes against his coat. His gloves must be warm enough to protect his hands, but thin enough to grip boxes. Each metal handle feels colder than the air around it. Every doorway becomes a momentary refuge. He moves quickly because standing still makes the cold settle deeper. Yet moving too quickly across icy pavement creates another problem entirely. Winter rewards caution and speed at the same time, which is not especially thoughtful of it. Construction workers face even harsher conditions. Still, concrete, ladders, tools, and exposed platforms become dangerous when ice forms. Cold metal seems to pull heat directly from the hands. Machinery may start slowly. Materials behave differently. A worker who spends hours outdoors learns to watch his footing, protect his fingers, and notice the earliest signs of numbness. The modern idea of simply working from home is not available to a man pouring concrete or repairing a street. A curious footnote of cold weather labour is the way workers improvise small shelters wherever they can. A truck cab, boiler room, loading entrance, basement, or shed can become a prized place for a few minutes of warmth. Someone keeps a pot of coffee nearby. Someone else brings soup in a metal container. Men crowd around heaters during breaks, holding gloved hands toward the warmth and discussing weather with the seriousness of diplomats. Retail workers experience winter from another angle. Department stores and neighborhood shops fill with customers carrying snow into entrances. Floors must be mopped repeatedly. Heavy coats take up space at counters. Clerks stand for long hours beneath bright lights while shoppers move between warm interiors and freezing streets. A store can feel almost festive from the outside, windows glowing against the grey afternoon. But behind the displays are staff managing wet floors, late deliveries, impatient customers, and aching feet. You step into a small neighbourhood shop where the owner knows many customers by name. He opens early because people still need bread, cigarettes, newspapers, soap, and milk regardless of temperature. Every time the door swings open, a blast of cold air enters. He may keep a small heater near the counter, yet the area closest to the entrance never quite loses its chill. Police officers and traffic workers endure long periods outdoors. Standing at an intersection during freezing weather requires a kind of patience, difficult to appreciate from a passing taxi. Gloves reduce dexterity, breath clouds the air, and boots become heavy with moisture. Traffic does not become kinder simply because the officer is cold. Drivers still honk, pedestrians still hurry. Somebody still insists that a minor inconvenience is a personal emergency. Firefighters, hospital workers, sanitation crews, transit employees, and utility workers face a different pressure because bad weather can increase demand for their services. Frozen pipes burst, boilers fail, people slip and fall, vehicles crash, fires still occur, hospitals must remain open. A storm may slow the city, but essential work often becomes more urgent rather than less. Scholars bicker over how much the image of the endlessly hard-working New Yorker reflects reality, and how much it became part of the city's own mythology. Certainly, many workers could not afford to miss a day without pay, which turns endurance into necessity rather than romance. The famous toughness of the city often rests on very ordinary economic pressure. You keep working because bills do not observe weather conditions. Lunch brings temporary relief, diners fill with office workers and labourers seeking hot food, soup arrives steaming, coffee cups are refilled, a plate of meat, potatoes, or a sandwich provides fuel for the hours ahead. Conversation shifts from work to weather and back again. Everyone has a complaint, a prediction, or a story about somebody whose car refused to start. Afternoon light fades early beneath winter clouds. Office windows turn dark and reflective while street workers continue under lamps. Inside factories, shifts change, trucks arrive late, a foreman checks the time, a clerk rubs tired eyes beneath fluorescent lights. The day feels longer because winter compresses the sunlight and stretches every journey. You notice that the cold does not create one shared experience. A bank employee may complain about wet shoes, a dock worker may spend 8 hours fighting wind from the river, a shopkeeper may worry about customers staying home, hospital orderly may simply hope transportation still runs at the end of the shift. The same storm falls across all of them, but work determines what that storm means. By the end of the day, your coat is dried enough to wear again. You pull it from the hook, button it carefully, and prepare to return to the street. Around you, desks are cleared, machines are shut down, counters are cleaned, and lights begin disappearing from office floors. The working city has survived another winter day not through grand heroics, but through thousands of people doing ordinary jobs under difficult conditions, which may be the more impressive form of endurance. You step into the morning world of New York children, where winter seems less like punishment and more like a challenge waiting to be accepted. Adults see frozen sidewalks, delayed buses, wet shoes, and heating bills. Children see snowbanks, icy railings, schoolyard corners, and the thrilling possibility that ordinary streets might briefly become playgrounds. The same cold that makes grown people mutter into scarves can make a child race toward a window and stare hopefully at the sky. School mornings begin with layers, warnings, and negotiation. Parents check coats, hats, gloves, scarves, boots, lunchboxes, books, and homework, while children insist they are perfectly warm, despite having forgotten half of what they need. You can almost hear the familiar instruction to button the coat properly. A child may obey for 20 seconds, then loosen it the moment an adult looks away. Records confirm that New York City operated one of the largest public school systems in the United States during the early 1960s. Hundreds of thousands of children moved through classrooms each day, and winter weather could complicate attendance without automatically stopping the school day. A storm that looks dramatic through a bedroom window may still result in the deeply disappointing announcement that school remains open. You walk beside children heading towards school across streets lined with dirty snow. Their boots leave uneven marks along the pavement. Some carry books against their chests. Others drag satchels or lunch containers that seem nearly as large as they are. Breath hangs in the air while conversation continues without pause. Children compare snow piles, complain about teachers, exchange jokes, and discuss matters that feel urgent precisely because they are young. Inside the school building, the transformation is immediate. Corridors fill with coats, dripping boots, and the smell of wet wool. Cloakrooms become crowded with scarves and hats. Radiators work hard against the cold carried in through every opening door. Teachers attempt to begin lessons while students are still recovering from the excitement of the walk. Classrooms in this period often feel formal by modern standards. Desks stand in orderly rows, chalk dust settles near blackboards, maps hang on walls, teachers expect attention, neat handwriting, and reasonably disciplined behaviour. Yet a heavy snowfall outside the windows can destroy concentration with remarkable efficiency. Every child knows that something far more interesting than arithmetic is accumulating on the playground. A curious footnote of winter school life is the way mittens and gloves seem to vanish inside buildings. One mitten disappears from a sleeve, another is found beneath a bench. A hat changes owner by accident. Teachers and parents become unwilling managers of a small textile mystery that repeats throughout the season. Somewhere in every school, there seems to be a lonely glove waiting for a reunion that may never come. Recess offers freedom. If conditions allow outdoor play, children rush into the cold with energy that makes adults question whether they belong to the same species. Snowballs appear instantly. Forts begin with great ambition and questionable engineering. Small hills become sledding slopes even when they were never intended for such use. Playgrounds become louder than the streets around them. You hear boots scraping packed snow, laughter, whistles, and the occasional dramatic accusation that somebody threw a snowball too hard. Teachers supervise with the weary alertness of people who know that fun can become trouble in approximately 3 seconds. Sledding is one of winter's great rewards. In parks and neighbourhood slopes, children pull wooden sleds across snow and climb hills that seem much steeper from their height. The ride down lasts only moments, but that hardly matters. They climb again and again, cheeks red, noses running, gloves soaked, and spirits somehow rising as their clothing becomes less comfortable. Central Park and other green spaces offer broad areas where snow remains cleaner and deeper than on busy streets. Families arrive with sleds, improvised sliders, and thermos bottles. Hills fill with shrieks of excitement. Adults stand nearby, stamping cold feet and wondering how many more trips down the slope can possibly be necessary. Children know the answer is always one more. Snowball fights develop their own unofficial rules. Packing the snow properly matters. Throwing at close range may provoke outrage. Hiding behind a parked car feels strategically brilliant until the owner appears. A carefully built snow fort can become the centre of an entire afternoon, complete with walls, ammunition piles, and alliances that may last until dinner. No agreement has been reached among social historians on how much freedom urban children enjoyed compared with children in later generations. Some accounts emphasise independence, with children walking to school, playing outdoors, and travelling around neighbourhoods with limited adult supervision. Others point out that freedom varied greatly according to age, family expectations, neighbourhood conditions, and social class. Childhood in New York is never one single experience. For some children, winter is far less charming. A family with limited money may struggle to provide good boots or a properly insulated coat. Wet socks stay wet, gloves wear thin. A long walk becomes exhausting rather than adventurous. The difference between enjoying snow and enduring it can be as simple as whether your shoes keep water out. You notice this contrast at school entrances. One child arrives in sturdy boots and a thick new coat. Another wears footwear already softened by slush. Teachers may quietly recognise which children need extra help, though resources vary. Winter reveals inequality quickly because cold is brutally practical. It does not care whether a family wishes it could afford better clothing. After classes, children emerge into the fading afternoon. Some head straight home, others linger near snow piles, making the most of whatever daylight remains. A stick becomes a hockey stick. A frozen patch becomes an experimental skating rink. A mound left by a plough becomes a fortress. The city provides materials and imagination supplies everything else. There is danger, of course. Ice hides beneath fresh snow. Cars have longer stopping distances. Ponds and rivers can tempt reckless curiosity. Parents warn children to stay away from thin ice and busy roads. instructions that gain urgency during severe weather. Winter play requires luck, judgment, and at least occasional obedience. Eventually cold fingers begin hurting, wet cuffs become unbearable, and even the most determined child accepts that it's time to go indoors. You watch children climb apartment steps carrying sleds, school books, and pieces of snow still clinging to their clothing. Behind doors, hot drinks, dry socks, homework, and evening television wait. For children, the brutal winter does not erase hardship, but it transforms ordinary spaces into places of possibility. Schoolyards become battlefields of harmless snow, parks become racing grounds, and neighborhood hills become mountains. In their world, cold can still hurt, boots can still leak, and adults can still spoil excellent plans. But snow also gives the city something rare, a reason to play with the weather instead of merely surviving it. You enter the practical world of household shopping, where winter turns even a simple grocery trip into a small expedition. There is no ordering dinner from a glowing screen, no quick delivery arranged with a tap, and no enormous refrigerator quietly holding a week of fresh food. You plan around weather, distance, money, and what you can physically carry. In many New York neighborhoods, daily life depends on a web of grocers, butchers, bakeries, delicatessens, produce stands, and small markets close enough to reach on foot. That closeness becomes especially important when sidewalks are icy and the wind makes every extra block feel longer. The neighborhood grocery store is often modest in size but rich in routine. You push through a door that opens with a bell, and warm air meets the cold clinging to your coat. Shelves rise tightly along the walls, canned vegetables, soup, flour, sugar, coffee, cereal, soap, and household goods are stacked with more efficiency than elegance. A clerk knows many customers by face, and sometimes by family. Regular shoppers may ask whether fresh milk has come in, whether the bread delivery is late, or whether there is a better cut of meat behind the counter. Records confirm that small neighborhood food shops still play a major role in New York during the early 1960s, even as larger supermarkets expand across the city and surrounding areas. Shopping habits are changing, but they have not yet become completely centered on huge stores and automobile trips. In dense neighborhoods, especially, walking to several specialized shops remains common. You move first toward the butcher. Meat is often purchased from someone who stands behind a glass counter and knows exactly how to cut what you request. You may ask for ground beef, pork chops, a roast, chicken, or a smaller portion carefully chosen to fit the week's budget. The butcher wraps your purchase in paper, folds the corners neatly, and ties it with string. There is something pleasantly ceremonial about the process. Even if you are mostly thinking about getting home before your fingers freeze. At the bakery, the atmosphere changes again. Warm bread gives the room a comforting smell that seems almost designed to weaken your judgment. Loaves sit behind glass. Rolls are stacked in baskets. Cakes and pastries occupy places of dangerous temptation. You came for bread. You leave with bread and perhaps something sweet because winter has apparently convinced you that survival requires pastry. A curious footnote of neighborhood shopping is the way some families still rely on regular delivery arrangements from local merchants. Milk, bread, groceries, or other goods may reach homes through neighborhood delivery services, especially for customers who are elderly, ill, or simply loyal to a particular shop. These systems are personal rather than automated. A deliveryman may know which apartment wants 2 bottles of milk, which customer pays at the end of the week, and which building has a stairway that seems specifically designed to punish the knees. Fresh produce creates its own winter challenge. Tomatoes, lettuce, onions, potatoes, apples, cabbage, and other staples remain available, but quality and price can vary with season and transportation. The modern expectation of every fruit appearing perfectly year-round is less firmly established. Winter cooking naturally leans toward foods that store well and survive travel, which is one reason root vegetables, canned goods, soups, and stews remain so useful. You watch a shopper study prices carefully. A few cents matter. Families with tight budgets may visit several stores to compare costs or wait for weekly specials advertised in newspapers. Coupons are clipped. Loyalty is balanced against necessity. The question is not merely what sounds good for dinner, but what can stretch across several meals without wasting anything. Cold weather makes carrying purchases difficult. Paper bags become damp if snow reaches them. Glass bottles are heavy. Your gloves reduce your grip, but you balance a bag against your hip while crossing an intersection, suddenly developing great respect for anyone who shops for a family of 5 without a car. Milk often comes in glass bottles or cartons, depending on the store and supplier, and people still remember a time when doorstep milk delivery was more widespread. In severe cold, glass containers present an amusing problem. Liquids can freeze if left outside too long. A bottle forgotten on a cold landing may become a household science experiment nobody requested. Scholars disagree about how quickly supermarket culture transformed daily food shopping in New York during this period. Some emphasize the rapid rise of larger self-service stores, broader selection, and packaged foods. Others note that neighborhood commerce remained deeply rooted, especially among families who valued personal service or lacked convenient access to automobiles. Both patterns exist at once. The old city of specialized shops is still alive while the newer world of larger grocery aisles is steadily expanding. You step into a larger supermarket and immediately feel the difference. Shopping carts roll along wider aisles. Bright packaging competes for attention. Frozen foods are becoming increasingly important. And refrigerators display products that promise convenience to households already pressed for time. Television advertising has helped create national brands familiar even before you enter the store. Convenience foods are a part of the changing American kitchen. Canned soups, boxed mixes, frozen dinners, instant coffee, prepared desserts, and packaged snacks offer speed. They do not eliminate traditional cooking, but they change expectations. A household can combine fresh meat from the butcher, vegetables from a produce stand, and a frozen side dish from the supermarket without seeing any contradiction. Outside, the winter evening has darkened. Store windows glow onto wet pavement, and people move between shops carrying parcels close to their bodies. A woman pauses to rearrange 2 bags before crossing the street. A man carries a loaf tucked under one arm and a sack of potatoes in the other hand. Someone complains that eggs cost too much. Someone else argues that the storm will be worse by morning. You begin the walk home with everything needed for several days. The bags pull at your arms, your boots push through slush, and the scent of fresh bread rises faintly through the paper. Shopping in winter is tiring, but it also reveals the intimate structure of the neighborhood. The butcher, baker, grocer, delivery man, and customer are connected by habits repeated week after week. By the time you reach your building, your fingers are tired from gripping the bags, but the contents feel valuable in a way modern convenience can obscure. Potatoes, milk, bread, coffee, meat, onions, canned soup, and perhaps one unnecessary pastry have crossed the cold city with you. They are not merely groceries. They are the ingredients of warmth, routine, and another winter evening successfully supplied. You carry the evening into the kitchen, where winter begins to feel less like an enemy and more like a reason to gather close. Outside, the city is dark and hard with cold, but inside this small room the air is different. A pot simmers, a kettle begins to tremble, steam gathers on the windows until the glass turns cloudy, softening the streetlights beyond it. Dinner is not simply a meal tonight, it is warmth you can taste. A small domestic answer to a season that seems determined to chill everything it touches. The kitchen table is rarely grand. It may be covered with a patterned cloth, marked by years of plates, cups, and family elbows. Chairs do not always match. One leg may wobble slightly. A radio sits nearby, perhaps carrying news, music, or a familiar evening programme while someone moves between stove and sink. The room smells of onions frying in a pan, coffee brewing, bread warming, and the faint mineral scent of steam from old pipes. Records confirm that home cooking remained central to everyday family life in New York during the early 1960s, even as packaged cheese and frozen foods become increasingly common. Dinner is still shaped by household income, neighbourhood tradition, working hours, and the practical need to feed several people without spending too much. In a cold winter, hearty food offers more than comfort. It stretches ingredients, fills stomachs, and makes a modest kitchen feel generous. You might begin with soup, chicken soup, vegetable soup, bean soup, or a thick broth built from whatever is available can simmer for hours and improve while it waits. A pot like this does useful work. It warms the room, feeds several people, and can become another meal the next day. Nothing about it needs to be fashionable. Winter is not asking for fashionable. Winter is asking whether you are warm and whether there is enough for everyone. Stews perform the same quiet miracle. A less expensive cut of meat becomes tender after long cooking. Potatoes, carrots, onions, and perhaps cabbage absorb the flavour. The lid rattles gently as steam escapes. Someone lifts it, stirs, tastes, and adds a little salt. The process is slow enough to fill the apartment with anticipation. For working families, however, not every dinner can spend hours on the stove. Convenience is becoming an important part of American food culture. Canned soup can become a sauce. Frozen vegetables shorten preparation. Boxed mixes appear beside traditional ingredients. A frozen dinner may offer relief after a difficult day, though the portions can inspire the suspicion that the manufacturer has never met a hungry teenager. Oddly enough, some families still treat certain new convenience foods as exciting symbols of modern life. A meal packaged neatly in separate compartments can seem futuristic, especially when television advertisements promise simplicity and progress. The irony is gentle. In a winter when pipes may complain, sidewalks may freeze, and old buildings may creak, dinner can arrive in a little aluminum tray declaring that the future is already here. You sit at the table as plates are served. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes might appear. So might baked chicken, macaroni, beans, casseroles, sausages, rice, or noodles. The exact menu changes from household to household, but warmth and economy guide many choices. Foods that can be stretched, reheated, or shared easily have obvious advantages when money is tight. Bread is almost always useful. It fills space on the plate, catches gravy, accompanies soup, and satisfies a hungry child who announces that dinner is taking too long. Butter softens near the stove, a loaf may already be sliced, or someone cuts thick pieces with a bread knife while conversation moves across the meal. Coffee remains a constant companion for many adults. It appears at breakfast, at work, after dinner, and during visits with neighbours. The smell alone makes the kitchen feel awake. Tea has its loyal drinkers too, especially when hands need something warm to hold. Children may receive hot chocolate, milk, or another simple drink, depending on the household and the budget. Scholars still debate how strongly the shared family dinner should be treated as a universal feature of mid-century American life. Popular memory often presents the period as an age when everyone sat together at the same time each evening. Reality is more complicated. Shift work, long commutes, crowded households, illness, poverty, and differing family arrangements could easily disrupt that ideal. The family table is common, but it is not identical in every home. You notice how conversation changes the room. Someone complains about the weather, someone talks about work, a child describes an argument at school with great seriousness. Another person reads part of a newspaper headline aloud. The radio speaks quietly in the background. Dinner becomes a place where the city is reduced to human scale, from millions of people to 4 or 5 around one table. In wealthier homes, the meal may be more elaborate. There may be better cuts of meat, imported goods, finer dishes, and a dining room separated from the kitchen. Yet even there, winter encourages similar pleasures. A hot roast, a bowl of soup, fresh bread, and coffee offer the same basic satisfaction. Cold weather is strangely good at simplifying appetite. In poorer households, the challenge can be sharper. Food must last, leftovers matter. Bones may become stock, bread is never casually wasted. A casserole can disguise the fact that expensive ingredients are scarce. The creativity of household cooking often grows directly from limitation, and recipes pass through families not because they are luxurious, but because they work. You finish eating slowly, plates are cleared and carried to the sink, water runs hot over dishes while condensation thickens on the glass. A towel hangs from the oven handle, someone scrapes the last potatoes into a small container rather than throwing them away. Morrow's lunch has already begun. For a little while, the kitchen remains the warmest place in the home. You sit with a final cup of coffee while the room settles. Outside, winter presses against brick walls and dark windows, but here there is steam, food, conversation, and the soft clatter of dishes. The meal has done more than satisfy hunger. It has made a small circle of comfort inside an enormous frozen city. You wake to a city that seems cleaner for perhaps 10 beautiful minutes, because fresh snow has covered the grime, softened the rooftops, rounded the parked cars, and filled the narrow spaces between buildings with pale quiet. Then New York gets to work on it. Tires grind through the white surface, boots churn the corners, buses splash through intersections, and the snow begins its rapid transformation from postcard scenery into something darker, heavier, and far less romantic. At first, the streets look almost gentle. Window ledges wear neat white caps, tree branches bend under powder, and the edges of Central Park seem briefly untouched. Yet the city has too many wheels, shoes, deliveries, and chimneys for purity to last. Within hours, the snow at the curb becomes grey. By afternoon, it is streaked with brown and black. At busy intersections, it turns into a thick mixture of water, grit, salt, oil, and everything else a large city leaves behind. Records confirm that New York relies on large sanitation crews, plows, shovels, and salt spreading to keep major streets passable during winter storms. The task is enormous because snow does not merely have to be pushed aside, it has to be managed around parked cars, crosswalks, hydrants, bus stops, loading areas, and miles of sidewalk. Clearing one path often creates a new obstacle somewhere else. You approach a corner and see the classic winter problem. A plough has pushed snow toward the curb, creating a ridge between the sidewalk and the street. Pedestrians have carved a narrow channel through it, but that channel is now filled with dark water. You cannot tell whether the puddle is 1 inch deep or deep enough to swallow your shoe. Everyone studies it with the concentration of an engineer. One person jumps across, another steps carefully along the edge, a third misjudges the distance and discovers the answer immediately. Water splashes over the top of a boot, and the expression that follows is so complete that no words are necessary. New York winter teaches many lessons, and one of them is that a puddle at a street corner should never be trusted. Snowbanks become enormous along certain blocks. As plows return again and again, the piles grow harder and dirtier. Frozen chunks lock together like rough stone. They narrow streets and hide the lower portions of parked cars. You may see a vehicle surrounded almost to the doors, its owner facing a long session with a shovel before it can move. A curious footnote of city winter is the strange archaeology that appears when these snow piles finally melt. Lost gloves, newspapers, coins, bottle caps, broken toys, and bits of street debris emerge from the dirty ice as though the season has been collecting souvenirs. Nobody planned this exhibition, but the city has been storing small objects beneath frozen layers for weeks. Garbage collection becomes more complicated too. Bags and cans must be placed where crews can reach them, but snowbanks block the curb. Collection trucks have less room to maneuver. Narrow streets become tighter. A pile of refuse can disappear beneath fresh snow and reappear later in a condition nobody wishes to inspect closely. You notice how quickly winter changes walking habits. People avoid the centre of sidewalks where ice has formed. They choose routes based on which building owners have cleared properly. A clean stretch of pavement can suddenly become a polished patch of packed snow near the next doorway. Your eyes remain lowered, studying each step rather than the skyline. Ice is often more dangerous than snow because it can be nearly invisible. Meltwater runs during the warmer part of the day, then freezes when temperatures fall. A sidewalk that looked merely wet at dusk can become treacherous by evening. People shorten their stride, hold railings, and develop the cautious walk that makes everyone look slightly older. Scholars disagree about how effectively mid-century cities handled major snow compared with later periods. Some argue that simpler traffic patterns and large manual workforces allow faster clearing in certain areas. Others point to weaker forecasting, older equipment, limited coordination, and the sheer scale of growing automobile use. What seems certain is that New York's winter cleanup required enormous human labour and could never make the snow disappear quickly enough to satisfy everyone. Shopkeepers take responsibility for the pavement directly outside their businesses. You hear the scrape of metal shovels against concrete as they cut through packed snow. Some spread salt or sand for traction, others chip stubborn ice with heavy tools. Every storefront becomes a small work site. Residential buildings face the same duty. Superintendents and maintenance workers shovel stoops, entrances, and paths toward the curb. Snow has an irritating habit of returning to places that were cleared only hours earlier. Wind pushes it back. Passing ploughs create new ridges. A fresh shower covers the clean pavement again. Winter offers very little respect for completed work. Children see possibilities in the piles that adults see as obstacles. A mountain of ploughed snow becomes a climbing hill. A hardened ridge becomes a fortress. Adults warn them to stay away from traffic while children examine tunnels and ledges that would never exist in another season. The same dirty pile can represent danger, inconvenience, and excellent entertainment depending on your age. Cars suffer visibly. Lower panels collect frozen grime. Tyres throw slush against doors. Windshields need constant cleaning. Salt leaves pale stains as the surface dries. A freshly washed automobile can look defeated after a single trip through winter streets. By late afternoon, the city has lost nearly all trace of the untouched morning. The snow is no longer soft, it is compressed, pushed, salted, stepped on, driven through, and piled into corners. Yet this ugliness tells its own story. New York is not preserving winter scenery. It is surviving it. Streetlights come on above banks of darkening snow. Water runs towards the drains where it can find them. Shovels scrape somewhere down the block. A truck pushes another load towards up the curb. The snow that once seemed to quiet the city has become part of the machinery of daily life, reshaped by millions of movements until winter itself looks unmistakably urban. You stand in the basement of an apartment building where winter reveals one of its least glamorous truths. Warmth depends on machinery. Above you, families sleep, cook, argue, read newspapers, and complain about the cold. But down here, a boiler labours in the dim light. Pipes run across the ceiling. Valves sit beneath layers of paint. Metal surfaces radiate heat into a room that smells faintly of oil, dust, damp concrete, and old iron. The whole building rests on the continued cooperation of this equipment, which is comforting only if you do not think too much about what happens when it stops. Heating a New York building in 1963 is often a centralized affair. Large apartment houses rely on boilers that produce steam or hot water and send it through pipes toward radiators in rooms many floors above. When the system works well, the heat rises quietly into daily life. When it works badly, everyone in the building knows. Pipes knock, radiators hiss, rooms warm unevenly, and tenants begin listening for signs that the system is still alive. Records confirm that many older New York apartment buildings depend heavily on steam heating during this period. These systems are durable but imperfect. They can produce tremendous warmth, yet they are difficult to regulate precisely from room to room. One apartment may feel comfortably warm, while another becomes stuffy enough for a window to be opened despite freezing temperatures outside. You turn a valve and hear a faint metallic complaint. Steam systems often make themselves known through sound. Radiators can bang, clank, hiss, spit, and occasionally behave as though someone had trapped a toolbox inside them. Much of this noise comes from water and steam moving through pipes that were never designed to care about anyone trying to sleep. The building superintendent becomes an important figure during severe weather. He knows whether boiler is temperamental, which valve sticks, which tenant complains first, and which basement pipe needs watching when temperatures fall sharply. He may live in the building, making him both employee and reluctant winter guardian. A knock at his door late at night rarely announces good news. Fuel is another part of the equation. Many buildings depend on heating oil, coal, or other fuel sources according to their age and equipment. Deliveries must continue even in severe weather. Trucks navigate narrow streets and stop beside buildings to replenish storage tanks. A missed delivery is not a minor inconvenience when outside temperatures remain dangerously low. Oddly enough, some older buildings still carry traces of an earlier coal-heated world even when they have changed to newer fuel system. Basement chutes, storage rooms, blackened brick, and heavy doors survive as reminders of the days when enormous quantities of coal had to be moved by hand. The architecture remembers even when the furnace no longer does. You climb a flight of basement stairs and place your hand near a pipe running through the hallway. It is warm, almost hot. Pipes like these sometimes heat common spaces accidentally. A stairwell can feel strangely pleasant near the boiler room, then turn cold several floors higher where less heat escapes. Inside an apartment, the radiator becomes part furniture, part machine, and part household mystery. People place small items near it to dry, though blocking airflow can reduce efficiency. Wet gloves may be draped nearby, towels hang close enough to warm, a chair may occupy the best position in the room simply because the radiator sits beside it. There are also hazards. Very hot radiators can burn skin, especially the hands of curious children. Leaking valves can damage floors. Improvised heating methods can create fire or gas dangers. Families struggling with poor heat may turn to portable heaters, ovens, or other risky solutions because cold makes people practical first and cautious second. No agreement has been reached among housing historians over how closely official heating requirements matched everyday reality in older buildings. Laws and regulations might establish standards, but enforcement can vary, equipment can fail, and tenants may hesitate to complain if they fear conflict with a landlord. A legal minimum temperature does not automatically mean every bedroom reaches it. You begin to understand why winter creates tension between tenants and property owners. Heat costs money. Boilers need maintenance. Fuel prices matter. Repairs can be expensive. Tenants, however, experience these questions in a much simpler way. Is the apartment warm enough to live in? If the answer is no, the economic explanation downstairs offers very little comfort upstairs. A boiler failure can transform the atmosphere of an entire building within hours. At first, someone notices that a radiator has gone quiet, then another person checks theirs. Doors open into the hallway, neighbours compare notes. Someone telephones the superintendent. Someone else puts on another sweater. As the walls lose stored warmth, the problem becomes harder to ignore. Families close unused rooms to preserve heat. Curtains are drawn. Children may sleep closer together. Blankets appear from closets, hot water bottles can be placed in beds, warm drinks become more frequent, the household contracts inward, trying to protect a smaller zone of comfort. Repair work may continue late into the night. A mechanic arrives carrying tools down the basement stairs. Flashlights move across pipes, metal panels are opened, valves are checked. The building listens from above. Although most residents do not understand the details, they are waiting for one simple sign: the return of heat. When the boiler finally starts again, the recovery is gradual. Pipes begin warming, radiators make familiar sounds, cold rooms slowly soften, a hand held near the metal surface detects the first hint of warmth, and relief spreads through the apartment long before the temperature becomes truly comfortable. This dependence on heating machinery shapes the winter city more deeply than the skyline suggests. Skyscrapers and apartment towers may look powerful from the street, but each one is vulnerable to pumps, pipes, valves, fuel tanks, maintenance workers, and basement equipment hidden from view. Urban grandeur rests on very ordinary mechanical systems. You leave the basement and climb toward the residential floors, where warm air meets you more clearly with each landing. Behind closed doors, people continue their evenings without seeing the machinery below. The boiler remains out of sight, doing one of the most important jobs in the building. In a severe New York winter, comfort depends not only on walls and roofs, but on whether an old collection of metal, steam, fuel, and human attention can keep working through the night. You enter a colder New York now, not because the temperature has changed, but because money has. The same winter wind reaches every block, yet it does not touch every household in the same way. In neighborhoods where wages are low, apartments are crowded, repairs are delayed, and savings are thin, winter becomes more than inconvenience. It becomes a test of how long a family can endure discomfort before discomfort turns dangerous. You feel it in narrow rooms, in worn window frames, in coats passed from one child to another, and in the careful way every household expense is measured. Cold exposes weakness quickly. A cracked window that seems tolerable in autumn becomes a steady stream of freezing air in January. A roof leak becomes worse when snow melts. A damaged radiator becomes urgent when temperatures remain low for days. Families who rent poorly maintained apartments may report problems repeatedly and still wait for repairs. Landlords vary greatly in responsibility, and tenants with little money or influence can find themselves trapped between legal rights and practical helplessness. Records confirm that large sections of New York in the early 1960s contain aging housing stock, including crowded tenements and deteriorating apartment buildings where poor maintenance is a serious concern. Urban renewal projects are changing some neighborhoods, but they also displace families and create uncertainty. For people already living close to the edge, winter arrives inside a wider struggle over housing, employment, race, neighborhood change, and public policy. You walk into a small apartment where several people share a few rooms. Privacy is limited, but during deep cold, crowding can provide one accidental advantage. Bodies generate warmth. Family members gather in the same room, closing doors to unused spaces and concentrating whatever heat is available. Blankets are layered over beds. Children may sleep together. The warmest room becomes the center of the household, whether or not it was designed for that purpose. The furniture tells you something too. A chair has been repaired more than once. A table has scratches deep enough to record years of use. Curtains are thick because they help block drafts. Cardboard may be fitted into a window where glass is cracked. Cloth is pushed around frames. These solutions are not elegant, but elegance is not the goal. The goal is to stop cold air from entering faster than the room can warm. A curious footnote of winter poverty is the way ordinary objects gain new purposes. Newspapers can be layered inside clothing. Cardboard can cover gaps. Bricks can be warmed and wrapped in cloth. And old blankets can become curtains, door blockers, or extra bedding. None of these methods is perfect. They exist because families improvise when proper repairs cost more than they can afford or depend on someone else to provide. Food budgets become tighter in winter as well. Heating costs rise while wages do not automatically follow. A family may spend more on fuel, transportation, medicine, or winter clothing, leaving less for groceries, soup, beans, bread, potatoes, rice, noodles, and inexpensive cuts of meat become especially valuable because they stretch. A pot that feeds 6 people twice is more useful than a meal that impresses anyone once. You notice how winter clothing reveals inequality on the street. One child wears a thick coat bought that season. Another wears one already shortened by growth, with sleeves that no longer reach the wrists properly. Boots may be handed down between siblings, soles may be patched, mittens may not match. None of this tells you anything about character, but it tells you plenty about money. For elderly residents, the risk can be greater. A person living alone may hesitate to heat every room because of cost. Arthritis makes stairs and icy sidewalks harder to manage. Grocery shopping becomes exhausting. A minor illness can become more serious when the body is already fighting cold. Neighbours sometimes notice who has not been seen for several days and knock on a door simply to check. Community networks matter. Churches, neighbourhood organisations, settlement houses, charitable groups, relatives, and neighbours may provide food, clothing, coal, heating assistance, or a warm place to sit. Help does not erase poverty, but it can make the difference between isolation and survival. A borrowed coat, a bag of groceries, or a repaired window can carry enormous value when the temperature falls. Scholars split over how much mid-century New York poverty should be understood mainly through personal income and how much through housing, segregation, discriminatory lending, unequal employment, and public policy. The debate matters because cold is never only about weather. A household becomes vulnerable through a chain of conditions built over years, including wages, rent, neighbourhood investment, health, and access to services. You move through a block where some buildings show clear signs of neglect. Paint peels around windows, fire escapes rust, hallway lights are weak, the front door does not close properly. The cold enters through every small failure. A wealthy family can answer winter by buying better insulation, warmer clothes, private transportation, and reliable repairs. A poor family may answer with towels, extra socks, shared rooms, and patience. There is dignity here too, though it should not be romanticised. Families maintain routines. Children still go to school. Parents still prepare meals. Floors are swept. Clothes are washed and hung to dry. Radios play. Birthdays happen. Neighbours laugh in hallways. Poverty does not erase ordinary life, but it makes every ordinary task more demanding. You hear a mother telling a child to keep a sweater on indoors. The child complains. She insists. There is no dramatic speech, no grand declaration about hardship, just a practical instruction repeated because the room is cold and the family must make it. Outside, the wind crosses rich and poor neighbourhoods with equal force. But equality ends there. Some people step into warm lobbies and heated cars. Others climb stairs toward rooms that never become fully comfortable. The winter of 1963 reveals a city divided not only by geography, but by protection from the weather itself. You leave with the uneasy knowledge that cold has become a measure of inequality. It shows which roofs leak, which coats are too thin, which families can pay for repairs, and which cannot. Winter does not create these differences, but it makes them impossible to hide, turning every draft, every unpaid bill, and every shared blanket into part of the social history of New York. You step into a different side of winter New York as evening settles over the city and doors begin glowing with warm light. The cold is still waiting outside, but restaurants, bars, theatres, jazz rooms, hotel lounges, and neighbourhood diners create pockets of shelter, where people gather simply because staying home every night would make the season feel twice as long. You push through a doorway and hear glasses touching, chairs scraping, conversation rising, and music drifting through cigarette smoke. For a few hours, winter becomes something happening on the other side of the glass. Nightlife in 1963 belongs to many different New Yorks at once. Broadway theatres draw crowds in polished coats and formal shoes, while smaller clubs offer music in darker rooms where tables sit close to the stage. Neighbourhood bars welcome regular customers who know the bartender by name. Diners remain open late, serving coffee, pie, eggs, sandwiches, and hot meals to workers whose schedules ignore ordinary bedtime. The city does not shut down when darkness arrives. It changes tempo. Records confirm that New York remains one of the major centres of American theatre, jazz, popular music, publishing, and nightlife in the early 1960s. Broadway continues to attract visitors from across the country, while clubs in Manhattan and beyond support musicians who are shaping modern jazz and other forms of popular entertainment. A cold night may discourage the casual walker, but it does not erase the appetite for performance. You stand near a theatre entrance as people arrive carefully across wet pavement. Ushers wait inside, taxis stop at the curb, couples hurry beneath the marquee, protecting hats and hair from light snow. The clothing is smarter here. Men may wear suits beneath overcoats, women dresses beneath long winter coats, and everyone faces the same awkward problem of what to do with several pounds of outerwear once seated. Coat checks become small but essential institutions. You hand over a heavy coat and receive a claim ticket that suddenly seems more important than its size suggests. Inside the theatre, the air feels almost too warm. People fan programs, loosen collars, and settle into red seats while the orchestra begins. Somewhere outside, snow continues falling without permission from the entertainment industry. A curious footnote of nightlife is the sheer amount of cigarette smoke accepted indoors. Bars, restaurants, clubs, and theatre lobbies can fill with a blue haze that settles beneath lights and clings to clothing. To a modern visitor, the smoke may be nearly as striking as the music. In 1963, however, it is treated as part of the atmosphere in many public spaces, an invisible accessory worn by nearly everyone whether they requested it or not. You move into a jazz club where the room is smaller and the audience closer to the musicians. Trumpet sounds from the stage, followed by piano, bass, and drums. The city outside feels remote now. Glasses shine beneath low lamps. Conversations fall quiet during a solo. The music stretches time, and the cold seems briefly irrelevant. Jazz in this period carries both artistic prestige and social complexity. Musicians experiment with new forms while clubs remain shaped by knacks, race, neighbourhood, and changing musical tastes. Some venues are famous, others survive only briefly. The performer you hear tonight may be celebrated by critics, ignored by the wider public, or remembered decades later with far more reverence than anyone in the room expects. Scholars bicker over whether the early 1960s represent the final great age of traditional New York nightlife, or the beginning of a more fragmented entertainment culture. Television keeps more people home. Popular music is changing rapidly, and neighbourhood patterns are shifting, yet the streets around entertainment districts still fill each evening with audiences willing to brave winter for a show, a drink, or simply the pleasure of being among strangers. You leave the club and enter a diner where the mood becomes wonderfully ordinary. The counter is lined with stools, coffee sits ready. A waitress carries several plates at once with the calm precision of someone who has done this 1,000 times. A cook works behind a stainless steel opening. Steam rises from the grill. Late-night diners attract an unusual mixture of people. Theatre-goers arrive after performances. Policemen take coffee breaks. Taxi drivers stop between fares. Hospital workers finish shifts. Musicians appear after clubs close. Couples sit quietly in booths. A man alone reads the newspaper over a plate of eggs. For a few hours, social boundaries soften beneath bright lights and endless coffee. You order something hot because winter makes the decision easy. Soup, grilled cheese, meatloaf, eggs, or pie with coffee all feel reasonable at an hour when sensible people are supposed to be asleep. The windows fog slightly from the warmth inside. Each time the door opens, everyone nearest it receives a reminder of the weather. Bars offer another form of refuge. Neighbourhood taverns can feel like extensions of the living room, except with strangers, stronger opinions, and someone else washing the glasses. Patrons discuss sports, politics, work, family troubles, and the temperature outside. A jukebox may play into the corner. The bartender listens selectively, which is probably a useful professional skill. For people living alone, such places can matter beyond entertainment. A warm public room offers company during a season that can make isolation feel heavier. You do not have to attend a grand performance. Sometimes sitting at a counter with coffee while another person complains about the weather is enough to make the evening feel less empty. New York's winter nightlife also belongs to people with money to spend. Fine restaurants, elegant hotel bars, supper clubs, and expensive theatre seats offer another layer of the city. Chauffeured cars and taxis reduce exposure to the cold. Fur coats and tailored overcoats signal status. Yet even wealthy patrons still hurry from curb to doorway when the wind catches them sideways. Near midnight, the city becomes quieter but never silent. Theatre crowds thin, restaurant chairs are stacked. Musicians pack instruments into cases, bartenders wipe counters. Diners continue serving the stubbornly awake, streetlights shine on wet pavement while steam rises around intersections. You step outside one final time and feel the cold return with immediate authority. The warmth of the club fades from your coat. Your breath becomes visible. Behind you, laughter escapes briefly as the door opens for another customer, then disappears when it closes. The night has offered no victory over winter, only temporary escape, and perhaps that is enough. New Yorkers keep going out because pleasure matters even when the weather is severe. Music, food, conversation, theatre, and simple companionship provide another kind of heat. One produced not by boilers or radiators, but by the refusal to let a hard season own every hour of the day. You sit at a kitchen table with a newspaper spread beneath your hands, and suddenly the winter outside is only one part of a much larger unease. The paper smells faintly of ink. Pages rustle beneath the yellow light. Headlines compete for attention with advertisements. Sports scores, theatre listings, crime reports, political arguments, and distant international crises. New York in 1963 is cold in more ways than one. Beyond the frozen streets lies a world shaped by nuclear anxiety. Civil rights struggles, political tension, and the uneasy confidence of a society racing toward the future while never entirely sure what waits there. Newspapers remain central to daily life. Morning editions arrive at apartment doors, newsstands, subway entrances, offices, diners, and hotel lobbies. A commuter folds the paper carefully to fit into a crowded train. A shopkeeper reads the headlines before opening. A family leaves one section on the kitchen table while another disappears into the living room. Television news is increasingly important, but the printed page still sets much of the rhythm of public conversation. Records confirm that New York supports several major daily newspapers during this period, each with its own style, readership, political character, and approach to sensational stories. Some emphasize national and international affairs. Others thrive on crime, scandal, celebrity, sports, and dramatic front pages. The competition is fierce because a headline has only moments to convince a person standing at a newsstand to spend a few cents. You stop at one of those stands and see rows of papers displayed beneath the shelter of a small roof. The vendor sits surrounded by magazines, cigarettes, candy, and stacks of newsprint. Cold air moves through the opening, yet business continues. People pause, scan the front pages, exchange coins, and move on. News is consumed quickly, often on the way somewhere else. Politics feels particularly close. The administration of President John Kennedy occupies much of the national conversation, and the memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis from October 1962 remains uncomfortably fresh. For several tense days, Americans had confronted the possibility of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. By the winter of 1963, the immediate crisis has passed, but the emotional residue remains. You can feel it beneath reports about diplomacy, military planning, and the wider Cold War. Civil defense is still part of public consciousness. Fallout shelter signs appear on buildings. Families have heard official advice about emergency preparation. Schools conduct drills that may seem orderly on the surface while carrying a darker implication underneath. The idea that a modern city could be devastated in minutes belongs not to distant science fiction, but to ordinary political awareness. A curious footnote of the era is that many people live with this nuclear tension while continuing completely normal routines. Someone reads about missiles over breakfast, complains about the price of coffee, then leaves for work. A newspaper may place international crisis beside an advertisement for a refrigerator or a winter coat. The contrast feels strange, but perhaps that's how human beings survive frightening times. Terror is made bearable by placing it beside grocery lists and sports pages. Civil rights struggles also occupy the national imagination. Across the United States, Black Americans are challenging segregation and discrimination with increasing force. While political leaders argue over federal action, New York is not the segregated South, but inequality, discrimination, housing barriers, employment differences, and racial tension are very much part of city life. The newspaper reader cannot pretend that social conflict exists only elsewhere. You turn another page and encounter crime reporting, often written in dramatic language designed to hold attention. Robberies, assaults, organised crime investigations, court cases, and police stories fill columns. New York's reputation as a tough city is partly built through such reporting. Although statistics and lived experience rarely fit neatly inside a headline, fear can grow from repetition as easily as from direct experience. Scholars continue to dispute how accurately newspapers of the period reflected public anxiety, rather than helping to create it. Some historians emphasize the press as a mirror of genuine fears about war, crime, racial conflict, and rapid social change. Others argue that sensational presentation could magnify danger because fear sold papers. The distinction matters, yet a reader at breakfast may not separate the two. What appears in large type feels important simply because it is large. Sports provide relief. Baseball remains a powerful New York obsession, even in the off-season. Fans discuss trades, players, memories, and hopes for spring. Boxing attracts attention. Basketball and hockey fill winter evenings. The sports pages offer a world where conflict has rules, scores, and endings, which can be comforting when political arguments seem endless. Entertainment pages create another escape. Broadway productions, films, nightclub performances, television programs, and celebrity news remind readers that New York is still a city selling glamour. A person can move from a report about nuclear strategy to a theatre review in less than a minute. The newspaper contains dread and pleasure side by side. Advertisements are part of the historical experience too. Department stores announce sales. Automobile companies promise modern comfort. Household products offer easier lives. Cigarette advertisements appear with a confidence that later generations may find startling. The language of progress is everywhere. Buy this appliance, wear this coat, drive this car here, and tomorrow will be cleaner, faster, brighter. Yet outside the newspaper stand, tomorrow looks grey with snow. You fold the paper under your arm and continue through the city. Headlines are discussed in barbershops, lunch counters, offices, taxis, living rooms, and bars. Some people trust one newspaper and despise another. Some read only the sports section. Some argue over editorials with great energy and little hope of changing anyone's mind. a tradition that appears remarkably durable. By evening, television joins the conversation. Families gather around sets for national news broadcasts. The pictures make distant events feel closer, though broadcasts are shorter than the endless stream of information familiar to later generations. There is still time for silence between updates. You cannot refresh a page every minute. The news arrives in scheduled waves, leaving long spaces in which ordinary life resumes. The winter city keeps moving beneath all this uncertainty. A newspaper blows loose across a sidewalk. A radio announcer speaks from a shop doorway. Television light flickers behind apartment curtains. People absorb stories of political rivalry and social conflict, crime, entertainment, and distant danger while continuing to work, eat, travel, and sleep. You begin to understand that the mood of 1963 is not simply fear or optimism. It is both at once. The future seems thrilling, modern, and technologically powerful, yet also capable of enormous destruction. New York carries that contradiction through its frozen streets, reading about a troubled world while insisting on another cup of coffee and another ordinary morning. You hear the city working before you see it. Somewhere beyond the apartment windows, metal scrapes against pavement, engines growl at low speed, and shovels strike packed snow with a steady rhythm. New York may look half buried, but beneath the white surface an army of workers is already trying to keep it alive. Sanitation crews, plough drivers, building superintendents, labourers, garage workers. And maintenance men move through the cold while most residents simply hope the streets will be passable by morning. The scale of the task is enormous. Every major avenue, side street, bridge approach, bus route, market district, school entrance, and hospital corridor depends on some form of clearing. Snow does not fall according to municipal convenience. It lands everywhere at once. The city must decide what gets attention first, what can wait, and how many crews can be moved where conditions are worst. Records confirm that New York relies heavily on sanitation workers and large fleets of plows and spreaders during major winter storms. Main roads generally receive priority because they carry the greatest volume of traffic and provide access for emergency vehicles. Smaller residential streets may remain difficult much longer, creating frustration among people who watch plows pass nearby without turning onto their block. You stand at the edge of an avenue as a plow approaches. Its blade pushes a heavy wave of snow toward the curb, throwing dark slush aside with enough force to make pedestrians step back. The truck moves slowly but powerfully, headlights glowing through the grey morning. Behind it, the road looks improved but hardly clean. Packed snow remains beneath the tyres, and another snowfall can begin undoing the work almost immediately. Salt spreaders follow on some routes, scattering coarse crystals across slippery pavement. The salt helps melt ice and improve traction, but it comes with consequences. Shoes stain, car bodies suffer, dogs lift their paws from irritated sidewalks, metal railings and vehicle parts begin a slow argument with corrosion. Winter maintenance solves one problem while quietly creating several others. A curious footnote of snow removal is the way crews sometimes become accidental neighbourhood celebrities during a severe storm. Residents may cheer when a plough finally enters a blocked street, especially after hours of waiting. The driver is not arriving with food, medicine, or dramatic rescue equipment. Yet at that moment, the sight of a steel blade clearing a path can feel almost heroic. Manual labour remains crucial. You see men with shovels working around hydrants, bus stops, crosswalks, entrances, and locations too awkward for large machinery. Snow becomes heavier as it absorbs water and traffic grime. A shovel full of fresh powder is one thing, a shovel full of compacted slush is another entirely. The shoulders and backs of workers pay the difference. Building superintendents take responsibility for their own small territories. A single apartment entrance may require repeated clearing throughout the day. The superintendent pushes snow from the stoop, chips ice from the steps, spreads salt and seals, then returns later to discover that wind and foot traffic have created fresh trouble. Residents pass through without always noticing the work unless it has not been done. Businesses face similar demands. Shopkeepers clear paths from doors to the curbs, restaurant workers sweep entrances, delivery areas must remain open enough for trucks to unload. A store can lose customers if the sidewalk outside becomes too difficult to cross, so snow removal becomes part of commerce as much as public safety. You watch two men trying to free a fire hydrant from a mound left by a plough. The work seems oddly specific until you remember why it matters. Firefighters cannot waste time digging through frozen snow during an emergency. Clearing hydrants is one of those winter tasks that receives little attention, precisely because success means nothing dramatic happens. Hospitals, police stations, firehouses, and transit facilities demand constant access. Ambulances must move, buses need turning space. Emergency workers cannot simply accept that a block is inconvenient. The city's snow strategy is therefore built around movement, not beauty. Nobody is trying to create a clean white landscape. They are trying to keep essential systems functioning. No agreement has been reached among urban historians on whether mid-century snow removal should be judged mainly by the technology available or by the expectations residents placed on city government. Some argue that New York performed remarkably well given older equipment, dense streets, and difficult parking conditions. Others point to recurring complaints, uneven service, and neighborhoods that waited far too long for attention. Efficiency often depends on where you stand when the storm arrives. Garages become centers of non-stop activity. Mechanics inspect plow blades, engines, chains, lights, hydraulic parts, and spreaders. Equipment failures are inevitable when machines operate for long hours in cold, wet conditions. A broken plow does not repair itself merely because the storm is inconvenient. Mechanics work while drivers rest briefly, then another shift begins. The human schedule can be punishing. Crews work through darkness, sleep at unusual hours, drink strong coffee, and return to the roads while snow continues falling. Faces become red from wind, gloves become wet, boots collect salt and grime. The work is repetitive, physical, and often invisible once the street is clear. Residents participate too. A group of neighbours may shovel a common path, someone clears the steps of an elderly person next door. Children are sent outside with smaller shovels and quickly discover that helping is less entertaining than playing. A homeowner works around a parked car, or building walls of snow on either side until the vehicle resembles an archaeological discovery. There are arguments. Naturally, one person pushes snow toward another property. A driver blocks a freshly cleared path. Somebody complains that a plough buried the entrance they spent an hour opening. Winter creates strange territorial instincts. A pile of snow that belongs to nobody suddenly becomes the subject of intense ownership disputes. By late afternoon, the city shows signs of the battle. Major streets are wet and dark, mountains of snow remain along curbs, workers lean briefly on shovels before starting again. Engines rumble through intersections, salt crunches beneath tires. Nothing looks finished, because the work of winter rarely feels finished. You stand beneath a street lamp as another truck passes, its blade lowered, pushing a fresh ridge toward the curb. The scene is not graceful, but it is essential. New York survives heavy snow through machinery, muscle, planning, argument, coffee, and thousands of repetitive motions performed by people whose names rarely appear in headlines. The city keeps moving because someone is always out there clearing a path. You begin to notice that winter life is not only about enduring discomfort, it is also about searching for small pleasures with almost unreasonable determination. New York offers plenty of them if you know where to look. A department store with bright windows, a diner with endless coffee, a warm movie theatre, a television glowing in a dark apartment. or a neighbour calling you in for a cup of something hot can all feel more valuable when the cold outside has spent the day trying to wear you down. Department stores become especially inviting during severe weather. You enter through revolving doors and feel polished warmth surround you. Perfume counters, clothing displays, elevators, escalators, lamps, and decorative signs create an indoor world that seems almost untouched by the season. People browse longer than they might in summer, partly because there is something to buy, and partly because nobody's eager to return immediately to the street. Records confirm that major New York department stores remain powerful institutions in the early 1960s, drawing shoppers not only for merchandise but also for restaurants, holiday displays, fashion, household goods, and the experience of spending time in a carefully arranged public interior. These buildings are part commerce and part theatre, offering ordinary people a few hours beneath bright lights and controlled temperatures. You ride an escalator slowly upward and watch coats loosen as shoppers warm up. Gloves come off, hats are adjusted, children press closer to toy displays. Someone pauses at a perfume counter. Someone else examines a television set that looks wonderfully modern. Sales clerks stand behind counters with practiced patience while customers wander, compare, and sometimes simply enjoy being indoors. A curious footnote of winter shopping is that some people use large stores almost like informal warming stations. They may browse far longer than their budgets justify, moving from one department to another without any urgent intention to purchase. Nobody announces this purpose. Of course, you simply become deeply interested in towels for 20 minutes because towels happen to be located somewhere pleasantly warm. Movie theatres offer another refuge. You buy a ticket, step into a dim lobby, and leave the weather behind for several hours. Popcorn smells drift through the air. Ushers direct people towards seats. Heavy curtains and darkened walls make the outside world feel remote. Once the film begins, there is no slush, no icy sidewalk, and no reason to think about your boots drying beneath the seat. For families, television provides an easier escape. By 1963, television has become a central feature of American domestic entertainment. Evening schedules offer comedies, dramas, westerns, variety programs, game shows, news, and sports. You sit on a sofa while the screen fills the room with moving light. The weather may rattle the windows, but the household has a shared distraction. There is a rhythm to these evenings. Dinner dishes are cleared. Children finish homework with varying levels of sincerity, and someone turns the television set on early to let it warm up. The picture may need adjustment. An antenna may require patient negotiation. Once the signal settles, the family gathers around because entertainment arrives according to schedule. If you miss a program, there is no convenient way to summon it again at midnight. Radio remains important too. It follows people into kitchens, bedroom, workshops, and cars. Music fills quiet rooms. Sports commentary brings distant games close. Talk and news accompany household chores. On a cold evening, the sound of a familiar announcer can make an apartment feel less isolated. Scholars argue over whether television weakened neighbourhood social life during this period or simply changed its form. Some historians see the growing screen culture as encouraging families to stay indoors and become more private. Others point out that neighbours still visit, children still play together, and shared television programs often create new topics for conversation. The truth is probably untidy, as most social life tends to be. You see that untidiness in an apartment where neighbours stop by without elaborate planning. Someone brings cake, someone else arrives with coffee, chairs are pulled closer together. The visit may last 20 minutes or 2 hours. Conversation moves easily from work to children, to weather to television, to somebody on the block who has recently done something worth discussing. Board games and cards fill quieter evenings. A kitchen table becomes a battlefield of luck, memory, and accusations that someone is cheating. Children play simple games while adults talk above them. A deck of cards can last years and create hundreds of winter nights from very little expense. Books and magazines offer another kind of warmth. You sit near a lamp with a novel, newspaper, puzzle, or popular magazine resting on your lap. The room is quiet except for turning pages and the occasional sound of traffic outside. Reading creates distance from the weather without requiring you to leave the building. Diners remain especially comforting because they are reliable. The coffee is hot, the lights are bright, and the menu offers familiar choices without some ceremony. You slide into a booth and watch condensation gather on the glass. A plate arrives with eggs, toast, soup, pie, or whatever modest pleasure you have chosen. The food does not need to be extraordinary. Warmth improves everything. Small luxuries matter. A fresh pair of dry socks after a wet day can feel absurdly wonderful. A hot bath becomes a reward. A blanket heated near a radiator feels almost extravagant. A telephone conversation with a friend can shorten a dark evening. Winter teaches you that comfort is often made from things too ordinary to notice in gentler weather. Children find their own indoor pleasures. Comic books, model kits, records, colouring books, toy trains, dolls, and simple crafts occupy hours when outdoor play becomes impossible. A living room floor can become a complete imaginary city while real snow presses against the windows. Adults may listen to records in the evening, jazz, popular songs, classical music, or Broadway recordings fill the room with sound. You lower the needle carefully and hear the brief crackle before the music begins. There is something intimate about choosing one record, turning it over by hand, and letting an entire side play. The cold remains real, but pleasure changes its scale. You do not need a grand vacation or expensive entertainment. You need a warm seat, good company, a familiar song, a hot drink, and perhaps something sweet you did not strictly need. You step toward the window and look down at the winter street, where people hurry beneath streetlights and cars move through wet pavement. Inside, the room holds conversation, music, television glow, and the smell of coffee. New York cannot make the season disappear, but it can fill the hours with enough small comforts that winter becomes not only something to survive, but something to remember. You feel the season growing heavier now, not because one storm is especially dramatic, but because winter has lasted long enough to wear down patience. By February and into March, New Yorkers are tired of watching the forecast, tired of scraping windshields, tired of stepping around frozen gutters, and tired of wondering whether another cold wave is coming. The city has not stopped, but the mood has changed. Early snow can still look beautiful. Late winter snow often receives a much colder welcome. The calendar says spring is approaching, yet the streets do not always agree. Cold mornings return after brief thaws. Rain becomes ice overnight, snow softens during the afternoon, then hardens into rough ridges by evening. You begin each day with suspicion because a patch of pavement that was harmless yesterday may be treacherous today. Winter has become less a spectacle and more a stubborn routine. Records confirm that the winter of 1962 and 1963 brought prolonged cold across large parts of the eastern United States, and New York experienced repeated periods of severe winter weather. What exhausts people is often not a single record temperature, but the accumulation of inconvenience. One difficult morning can be endured with humour. Weeks of difficult mornings require another kind of strength. You see that fatigue in the smallest gestures. A commuter no longer admires fresh snow on a rooftop. A shopkeeper sighs before reaching for the shovel. A mother looks at another pair of wet children's boots and seems personally betrayed by the weather. A building worker hears a forecast for more snow and simply stares at the radio for a moment, perhaps considering whether the announcer can be held responsible. Budgets begin to feel the strain too. Heating fuel has been consumed steadily, shoes may need repair, gloves have been lost, coats have absorbed weeks of grime. Families who started the season with careful savings now face another round of expenses. Winter has a talent for charging small fees repeatedly until they no longer feel small. Cars show similar exhaustion. Batteries weaken in severe cold. Salt attacks mount metal. Tyres lose confidence on icy streets. Wipers smear dirty water across windshields. Drivers visit garages with problems that seem to multiply with the season. A mechanic lifts the hood, listens to the complaint, and probably hears a version of the same story several times that day. A curious footnote of late winter life is the strange optimism caused by the first slightly warmer afternoon. Temperatures rise just enough for people to open coats, stand longer outside, and announce that spring has finally arrived. Then the next morning brings freezing wind, and the city receives a useful reminder that weather does not sign contracts. You walk through a park where snow has begun retreating from patches of grass. The exposed ground looks flattened and tired, but the sight of brown earth feels almost axwung. Small puddles gather along paths, bare branches still dominate the trees, yet daylight lasts a little longer. These changes are modest, but after months of winter they feel important. Children notice first. They stay outside later because the evening does not darken quite as quickly. Heavy snowsuits become less necessary on milder days. Games move from snowbanks toward open pavement. A ball appears where a sled once belonged. The season has not ended, but childhood is already negotiating with it. Adults are more cautious. They have seen false spring before. Coats remain close at hand. Nobody puts away blankets with complete confidence. A warm afternoon may be followed by a cold night, and frozen pipes or icy sidewalks are still possible. Hope arrives, but it arrives wearing sensible shoes. Arguments split among social historians over whether New York's reputation for resilience grows mainly from genuine shared hardship or from stories the city tells about itself. The myth of the tough New Yorker is powerful because it contains some truth. Millions of people continue working and commuting and shopping, raising children, and caring for one another through difficult conditions. Yet endurance is often less dramatic than the mythology suggests. Most people simply have obligations that cannot wait for better weather. You notice this ordinary endurance in a hospital employee leaving home before sunrise. You see it in a grocer opening the shutters, a teacher checking attendance, a postal worker carrying a heavy bag, and an elderly woman taking careful steps toward a corner shop. None appears heroic in the grand sense, yet the city depends on precisely this kind of persistence. There is irritation alongside determination. Tempers shorten when buses are delayed. Neighbours argue about snow piled near entrances. Drivers become impatient in narrow streets. A late winter storm can feel insulting because everyone has already done enough shoveling. The famous New York directness becomes even sharper when mixed with wet socks. Still, community habits continue. Someone clears a path without being asked. A neighbour carries groceries for an older resident. A stranger holds a heavy door while another person struggles with packages. A shopkeeper allows a customer to stand inside for a moment and warm up. These acts are small enough to disappear from public memory, yet they are part of how a city endures any difficult season. The machines are tired too. Ploughs need repairs. Heating systems need attention. Street surfaces develop damage after repeated freezing and thawing. Water enters cracks, freezes, expands, and breaks pavement apart. Potholes emerge as winter's parting gifts, proving that even when the snow disappears, the season knows how to leave paperwork behind. You hear dripping water from rooftops during a milder afternoon. Icicles shrink. Gutters begin running again. The sound is different from the hard silence of severe cold. It suggests movement. Sunlight reaches building walls at a warmer angle. People pause near storefronts instead of rushing immediately indoors. Then a cold gust comes down the avenue and reminds you not to celebrate too soon. Scarves tighten again. Hands return to pockets. New York has survived the worst, perhaps, but survival is not the same as completion. The season begins loosening its grip slowly, almost reluctantly. Snowbanks shrink into dirty islands. Longer daylight lifts the mood. Store windows begin showing lighter clothing that seems almost absurd while the wind is still cold. Everyone is looking towards a spring, even while winter remains underfoot. You continue through the city with the peculiar confidence of someone who has been tested repeatedly and has learned the rhythm of endurance. The cold may return tomorrow. Another storm may still arrive. Yet something has changed. Winter no longer feels endless. The city senses its limits, and New Yorkers begin carrying that quiet knowledge with them through each lengthening day. You stand beneath a softer sky now and look across New York as the winter of 1963 begins to reveal what it has really shown you. The snow itself is only part of the story. What remains in memory is the way ordinary people adjust their lives around cold, money, peso, family, transportation, and one another. A winter can make a great city look vulnerable, yet it can also expose the hidden systems that keep millions of lives moving beneath the towers and bright signs. New York depends on hands turning valves, workers clearing streets, parents stretching household budgets, shopkeepers opening doors, and strangers making room for one another. The city you see is far less polished than the version preserved in photographs and films. Streets are noisy, buildings can be worn, and smoke hangs in the air, and comfort is distributed unevenly. Yet there is an extraordinary density of human life within these blocks. One building may hold dozens of private stories stacked vertically above the sidewalk. A nurse returns from work while a child studies at a kitchen table. A musician prepares for an evening performance, and an elderly tenant listens to the radio alone. Winter places each life inside the same weather, while allowing every experience to remain different. Records confirm that New York in 1963 stands at an important point in its modern history. The city remains a global centre of finance, culture, immigration, industry, entertainment, and political influence. Yet major economic and social changes are already underway. Manufacturing employment will decline in later decades, neighbourhoods will change, transportation patterns will shift, crime, public finance, housing, and urban policy will become increasingly difficult questions. For now, however, you're seeing a city still closely tied to older habits even as a new era gathers around it. The winter makes those older habits visible. Local merchants remain important. Newspaper stands still shape the morning. Families arrange evenings around scheduled television programs. Many jobs depend on physical presence rather than electronic communication. Buildings rely on mechanical systems that require regular human attention. Information travels quickly by the standards of the day, but not instantly. You can leave home without being reachable until you arrive somewhere with a telephone. An idea that feels almost magical in its own way. A curious footnote of this period is how little some daily hardships are photographed. Cameras naturally seek dramatic scenes. Deep snow, stalled vehicles, crowded streets, famous buildings. They rarely preserve the wet sock inside a worker's shoe, the cracked window stuffed with cloth, the mother calculating whether groceries can last another day, or the superintendent listening anxiously to an aging boiler. Yet these quiet details often explain the past better than spectacular images do. You notice that resilience itself has several meanings. For one person, it means laughing about bad weather and going to work anyway. For another, it means enduring a cold apartment because there is no affordable alternative. One kind of resilience feels admirable, bold. The other can become a polite word for hardship that should never have been necessary. New York contains both. Historians continue to argue over whether the strongest lesson from mid-century urban life is collective strength or persistent inequality. One view emphasizes community networks, public transportation, dense neighborhoods, municipal services, and the remarkable ability of residents to function through severe conditions. Another emphasizes unequal housing, poverty, racial discrimination, poor maintenance, and the fact that some residents were protected from winter far better than others. The two interpretations do not cancel each other. They exist on the same street. You can see that contradiction by walking only a few blocks. A wealthy household may enjoy reliable heat, warm clothing, private transportation, and enough money to turn winter into an inconvenience. Nearby, another family may measure fuel, reuse clothing, and worry about every unexpected expense. Both can call themselves New Yorkers. Both can watch the same snow fall from their windows. The weather is shared, but security is not. Still, community appears in places where formal systems cannot reach quickly enough. A neighbour checks on someone living alone. A shopkeeper extends credit to a familiar customer. A relative brings food. A building worker stays awake late to repair equipment. A stranger offers an arm on an icy step. These gestures rarely enter official records because they seem too small for history. Yet cities survive partly through precisely such actions. You begin to hear New York differently. There is the low rumble of traffic, the distant movement of trains, the closing of shop doors, the ringing of telephones, and the murmur of radios behind apartment walls. The winter gives these sounds a kind of intimacy. Each one tells you that somebody is still awake, still working, still caring for someone, or simply passing the evening. The season also reminds you how physical daily life is in 1963. You carry purchases yourself, you climb stairs, you wait outside, you handle coins, newspapers, packages, keys, shovels, tools, and heavy clothing. Weather reaches you directly because so much of life happens through contact with the city rather than through digital distance. Convenience exists, but it has limits. A person must still go somewhere, lift something, repair something, or speak to someone face to face. That physical world can be exhausting, yet it creates forms of connection that are difficult to measure. You recognize the grocer, you know the superintendent, you exchange words with the newspaper seller, you hear the same neighbors through the walls and pass the same people on the staircase. Privacy may be limited, but anonymity is not complete. New York, during the winter of 1963, therefore becomes more than a story about severe cold. It becomes a portrait of a city balanced between old and new, wealthy and struggling, private and communal, glamorous and ordinary. The bright theatre signs exist beside dim hallways. Elegant restaurants exist beside inexpensive lunch counters. Famous avenues exist beside blocks where families quietly stretch every dollar. You look across the city once more and understand why such winters remain powerful in memory. People rarely remember a temperature as clearly as they remember what the temperature made them do. They remember who helped shovel, which room stayed warm, where they drank coffee, how long the walk felt, and how good it was to close a door behind them at the end of the day. The cold eventually passes, as every season does, but the human patterns it exposes remain. New York stands because millions of ordinary people continue doing ordinary things under difficult conditions, and there is grandeur in that simplicity. The true history of this winter is not written only in weather reports. It lives in kitchens, basements, sidewalks, workplaces, schools, diners, and crowded apartments where the city keeps breathing quietly through the cold. Word count 989. And now the streets grow quieter in your imagination. The last lamps shine across damp pavement, and the hard edges of winter begin to soften into memory. You have walked through a New York built not only from stone and steel, but from patience, humour, labour, worry, and small acts of kindness. Perhaps one detail stayed with you more than the others. If it did, share it in the comments. Tell us what part of this winter world you would most like to experience for one evening. Your memories and thoughts help keep these stories alive. When you are ready for another journey into the past, choose the next history video on the channel and let another city, another generation, and another forgotten world slowly takes shape around you. For now, allow the sounds of traffic to fade, let the windows dim, and let the winter streets drift gently away. Rest well, sleep peacefully, and carry only the warmth with you. Blessings to you and your family.